Hi, folks. Welcome again to another episode of Pro Football in the 1970s. I'm your host, Joe Zagorski. Now, thanks to the Sports History Network, a signed copy of my new book, The 2003 Yard Odyssey, The Juice, The Electric Company, and an Epic Run for a Record, will be given away to one lucky fan. It's all about the 1973 Buffalo Bills. Please check out the Sports History Network online for details on how you can win a free copy of my new book on the 1973 Buffalo Bills. Thanks a lot for listening in to today's episode, folks. Look forward to chatting with you again soon in the future. Take care.
Welcome to another head-banging, rocket-fueled, monster-filled episode of Wrestling with Heels On, where we take a memorable stroll down Vanilla Lane together. Yeah, Mr. Recording Engineer, there's a typo in the copy. It's supposed to say Villainy Lane, but it says Vanilla.
Brian, you got it right. It's Vanilla. Vanilla Lane. That's what I got in copy. Vanilla.
Now, why would it say Vanilla when the show's about Johnny Rotten types and the like?
Usually, yes. But this episode is about vanilla skies, apple pie, cross-faced chicken wings, and one of the humblest nice guy wrestlers to ever hold the WWF title.
And who's that you're referring to?
Why, the one and only Bob Backlund.
Never heard of him.
Then you have got a lot to learn, my friend. The date was August 30, 1982. The place, Madison Square Garden. I was there to see the six-man tag team match between Andre the Giant and the Strongbow brothers versus Blackjack Mulligan and Mr. Fuji and Mr. Saito. Harking back to the first episode of this show, you'll recall I tirelessly begged my father to take me to this wrestling card, and he finally gave in. Even though the six-man tag team was the main event, I was treated to so many wonderful matches that night. Among the highlights were Pat Patterson versus Cowboy Bob Orton, Superfly Jimmy Snuka versus Pedro Morales, Tiger Mask versus Dynamite Kid, and Playboy Buddy Rose versus Bob Backlund. As an 11-year-old back then, I was incapable of appreciating the magnitude of what I was watching, the rarity of some of these matchups. For starters, it was rare to see Tiger Mask and Dynamite Kid wrestling each other in the United States, as their feuding mostly occurred in Japan. Good luck catching a Tiger Mask match of any kind on American televised wrestling. Tiger Mask was an elusive and exotic figure in that wrestling era. If you weren't up on your wrestling magazine reading, you might not have even known he existed. To watch Tiger Mask and Dynamite Kid wrestle each other was to watch two wrestling virtuosos at the height of their powers. Sadly, Dynamite Kid, who was widely revered for his all-around in-ring athleticism, was left wheelchair-bound after battling spinal injuries throughout his career. Wrestling legend Bret Hart once proclaimed Dynamite Kid, pound for pound, the greatest wrestler who ever lived. Although I couldn't possibly know that about him at the time, I'm still grateful I had the chance to see him and Tiger Mask display their wrestling virtuosity on August 30th. Then there was Pat Patterson and Cowboy Bob Orton. What I recall about this match was how much I wanted to see Orton beat Patterson. I was a big fan of Orton's finishing move, the Superplex. It was a finishing move requiring the use of the ropes, and not many wrestlers were doing that at the time. The match was 10 minutes long and one-sided in favor of Patterson, but fast-paced and exciting nevertheless. The rarities of this match were seeing Patterson wrestle at a time when he was mostly relegated to his boring television color commentary on TV, and seeing Orton when he was on the downswing from his earlier unsuccessful bids for Bob Backlund's WWF Championship. A few months after this match with Patterson, Orton left the WWF for the NWA, where he had a successful run for 2 years before returning to the WWF as Ace. Roddy Piper's cast-wearing bodyguard. This second incarnation was the more successful run for Cowboy Bob Orton. Pedro Morales versus Jimmy Snuka was a much better matchup than Orton versus Patterson. First of all, there was a lot more at stake. Morales was the WWF Intercontinental Champion. Snuka was a top contender who'd had some memorable title shots against Bob Backlund and was getting a lot of heat as a bad guy, increasingly winning over fans wherever he fought. These two, along with Don Morocco and Greg the Hammer Valentine, were the dominant rivals for the Intercontinental Championship. These rivalries were akin to those of Thomas Hearns, Sugar Ray Leonard, Roberto Duran, and Marvin Hagler in boxing. This was also a rare opportunity for me to stand apart from my father by openly rooting for Jimmy Snuka. My father, if you recall from a previous episode, was a huge fan of Pedro Morales, and rightfully so. Morales was the pride of Puerto Rico. Not only was he the then current Intercontinental Champion, but also a former WWF Heavyweight Champion and one half of a WWF Tag Team Championship that he shared with, wait for it, Bob Backlund for exactly one day. The WWF rule at the time prohibited anyone from holding two championships at the same time. This made Morales the first WWF Triple Crown champion. His heavyweight championship reign is the fifth longest in WWF history, 1,027 days. Is there any wonder why my dad loved this man so much? As an 11-year-old, none of the above stats mattered to me. Pedro was old school, while Jimmy Snuka had all the physical characteristics of a leopard, making him new, scary, and thrilling. But no matter whom they were rooting for, the wrestling fans in attendance that night knew they'd be in for one hell of a match. Here's the thing about outwardly siding with Jimmy Snuka. My father would have considered it cultural treason to root for the non-Latino. He never cheered for the non-Latino, and the same was expected of me. On top of that, my father's enthusiasm was so damn infectious. As the excitement unfolded in the ring, my dad had the habit of swinging his fists in time to the punches his hero was throwing. It was like he was fighting Snuka. He never hit me with his elbows, but he did grab my forearm in a vice-like grip once or twice, leaving mild black and blues on my arm for a day or two. To this day, I do the same thing when I'm cheering for someone to win. I learned it from him. The point is, I also cheered for Morales to win. My dad had won me over with his straightforward pride and the physicality of his enthusiasm, and damn it if it didn't feel good to stand with him rather than against him. The two of us displaying our Puerto Rican pride, cheering together, bonding over wrestling, bonding over Pedro. The match ended in a double countout, just as it should have. These two men weren't giving up an inch to the other. They lived to fight another day, and so did my dad and me. And then there was Bob Backlund, taking on the number one contender at the time, Playboy Buddy Rose. Rose was a journeyman wrestler who made his bones fighting in many wrestling territories under his real name, Paul Pershman. He changed it to Buddy Rose on October 15, 1976, and in 1982 became Playboy Buddy Rose, a womanizing rich man who rubbed his success in the fans' faces. Rose's heavyweight and cavalier attitude in the ring really sold the gimmick. Fans hated him, but he was no slouch when he wrestled. He was surprisingly quick for his weight. pitting the lazy-bones rich guy against the all-American apple pie farm boy champion who abides by the Boy Scout code of ethics is a foolproof wrestling trope. It's all about playing up economic class distinctions in the ring. And it worked well that night. This was red meat for the fans, and we gobbled it up. Like Tiger Mask, it was a rarity to see Backlund fight on televised American wrestling. If I did see him, it was usually in a rebroadcast of a taped closed-circuit Madison Square Garden fight that happened a few weeks ago. It was better than nothing, I guess, but by then I'd already known the outcome and the excitement was gone. But this match was live, and I couldn't believe Bob Backlund and I were sharing the same oxygen. He was real and about to defend his title. Rose was escorted to the ring by 2 female valets and his manager, the Grand Wizard. Now, I do not, for the life of me, remember the match blow for blow. How could I? I do not possess Mary Lou Henner's exceptional memory, but one thing that stands out for me was how often we, the crowd, counted with Backlund when he twisted Rose's neck while Rose was headlocked. It was a hair-raising experience to count in unison with all those rabid fans. That much I remember, yes-sirree, Bob. Now, because I don't recall that night to the fullest, I want to read a description of the match I found on the Pro Wrestling Only forum. Superstar Sleaze, what a name, posted it on February 26, 2019. Well written and detailed, I thought I'd read it to you because it seems like a very accurate description of how the match transpired that night on August 30.
Introducing the challenger in the corner to my left from Las Vegas, Nevada, weighing 200.
Rose is playing his Playboy character to the hilt. He has his ladies in Vegas showgirl tuxedos preening while he gives them a kiss, and then one for the Grand Wizard.
When I come to the ring, you shall rise. The corner to my right is the World Wrestling Federation Heavyweight Champion from Princeton, Minnesota, weighing 234 pounds. It is Bob Backlund.
And just like that, Bob Backlund is over like Rover. The fans are on their feet. It's a standing ovation. Okay, it's early on in the match, but Backlund has the Playboy betwixt and between. He doesn't know if he's coming or going. On a couple of amateur sequences, Backlund is like the Tasmanian devil on the mat, rendering Buddy Rose discombobulated on the outside, wondering what just happened. Buddy Rose tries charging, but a series of single-leg pickups results in him on his butt repeatedly. He tries a full Nelson, but Backlund thrusts backwards, and Buddy Rose ends up going through the ropes and taking a seat on the cold concrete. And Rose avoids the O'Connor roll, only to eat a drop kick and goes sailing back over the top rope. He might as well take residence on the outside, given how much time he's spending out there. And Rose slams Backlund's head into the turnbuckle and gives him a good chop for good measure. But before taking him over, he's got him in a side headlock now. And Buddy mounts his comeback by getting Backlund in a side headlock. He starts stomping Backlund mercilessly until Backlund is forced off the apron.
Bobby going to work. Bobby trying to pull it right out of the socket. Backlund right back to the arm stretcher.
He's still stretching away.
Banks getting with the count now. Rose in a lot of trouble right now.
Oh!
Not too nice to have that boot right in your mouth either.
Buddy Rose now with 5 elbow drops in a row.
Higher on that, think we could have had a new champion.
Buddy Rose has Backlund in a heap of trouble now.
Coming out of the corner, knee drop right to the forehead. That'll give you a headache. Bobby right around, reversed it. Chicken
That
wing.
could be it. That could be it.
That's all over. I think chicken wing crossface. He gets him out in the center. It's over.
And I think he gave up.
He's going to get him, Dick. He's got it right in the center. He's got the crossface. SD asking him, you can't take too much of this hole. The pain is unbelievable. He got him.
And it's all over.
One of the things Backlund learned early on from ring mentor Terry Funk was to not impose his wrestling style on his opponent, but rather adapt to his opponent's style. It's a technique aimed at getting his opponent over with the crowd. And that's what Backlund did with all his opponents. Bob Backlund held the WWF Heavyweight Championship from February 20th, 1978 to December 26, 1983. An incredible 2,138-day title reign. It is one of the longest reigns in pro wrestling history. Backlund had over 800 successful title defenses during his championship. This is an amazing feat when you consider the range of opponents Backlund defended against. There was Ken Patera, Superstar Billy Graham, Big John Studd, Hulk Hogan, Sergeant Slaughter, Jimmy Superfly Snuka, Ric Flair, and Harley Race. These last two are particularly notable because they were title holders themselves from different wrestling organizations. In other words, Backlund was one of the last champions to fight title unification matches. Most of those unification matches ended in draws or double disqualifications, but there was one title match that did not end well for Backlund. It was a match in Tokushima, Japan, on November 30th, 1979, between Backlund and Antonio Inoki. Inoki defeated Backlund and won the WWF title, but the WWF refused to acknowledge the title change, pretending it never even happened. This match occurred in the middle of Backlund's 5-year run as champ, but it did nothing to affect his championship status. Even though Backlund was the WWF champion during the volatile 70s, with all its political and socio-economic upheavals, I remember him as a figure of moral stability. He rarely lost his temper and always maintained a low, even-keeled tone during his promos. His boyish, howdy-doody face probably caused many of his opponents to underestimate him. It was a mistake they learned not to make again. Bob Backlund was deceptively strong, known to bench press over 500 pounds during his heyday. Here is Backlund's promo for the Buddy Rose match.
A lot of people have been trying to get me off of where I'm at in different ways, but this Grand Wizard has really got a conspiracy going for himself. It's got me thinking about Billy Graham so much that, and he knew that I had this contract with Buddy Rhodes, so he's got my mind diversified. Half of my mind's thinking about what Billy Graham did to that belt, and the other half is thinking about Rhodes. And I know when I get into that ring with Rhodes, I got to have my mind directly focused on him, or else he's going to put me down and take the WWF title, and then I wouldn't be able to go after Graham in the way I would want to, Vince, because I want that man. I want him very, very badly for the hurt that he put on me. When he did that to that belt, broke it and tore it apart, it was like he was twisting on my heart, and I know he was twisting on a lot of those wrestling fans out there too, because they loved that belt, they respected it. When I get into that ring with Graham, I mean with Rhodes.
Poor Bob was so twisted about what Graham had done to the belt, he forgot who he was wrestling. He meant he was wrestling Playboy Buddy Rose. It was a rare moment of confusion for Backlund because most of his promos, a typical Bob Backlund promo, always emphasized his obligation as a role model to the kids. Backlund was sincere and plain-spoken, none of the bluster of Hulk Hogan's "take your vitamins and say your prayers" shtick. In fact, Backlund has been openly critical of Hogan's apparent hypocrisy when it comes to messaging kids, and Backlund has said that Hogan hasn't walked the walk with his history of steroid and illicit drug use. Because Backlund was a model of rectitude during the pivotal 70s, he seemed like a champion from a bygone era. An era when it wasn't corny to walk the line. All you have to do is watch the All-Star Wrestling opening sequence featuring Bob Backlund joining an in-the-ring victory celebration with wrestler SD Special Delivery Jones and a big group of kids. They're jumping up and down in the ring, which is probably on the verge of collapsing, the way Rocky did with the neighborhood kids who ran behind him in Rocky II. It's just one of those moments that feels spontaneous and unstaged. I don't think there's been another victory celebration quite like it in the WWF. That opening sequence was so memorable, I could recall it without even having to look it up on YouTube. Watching that sequence again really brought me back to my childhood. Eventually, I did look it up on YouTube. That's the Bob Backlund persona I prefer to remember. The fresh-faced, all-American champion from the heartland. And not the raving lunatic with a crew cut and bow tie. The latter description is what he became when he turned heel for his comeback to the WWE. New heel persona was supposed to be a holier-than-thou right-winger spouting mispronounced excess verbiage a la Rush Limbaugh. As Mr. Backlund, the now morally superior Backlund, would only sign autographs for anyone who could name all the former U.S. presidents without a hitch. Needless to say, Mr. Backlund didn't have to sign a whole lot of autographs. I was not a fan of this new persona and thought it was a way to disparage Backlund's moral rectitude and overall wholesomeness. Backlund's return to the WWE marked the end of Backlund's kind of purity, and maybe even the beginning of wrestling storylines steeped in debauchery. Backlund's memoir is called Backlund, From All-American Boy to Professional Wrestling's World Champion. I have not read it yet, but it is most definitely at the top of my must-read wish list. Whether you liked his wrestling style or not, or thought he was too vanilla for you, Backlund is an especially significant champion because of his title reign stats and his influence on a generation of young fans just starting to get into the wide world of professional wrestling. His championship era was the last station before the hyper-masculinity of the 80s, 90s, and the early 2000s. Backlund wasn't a wrestling god, but a fighter and survivor who never shied from an opponent, no matter how big or far they were. He was always willing to meet them in the middle, no matter where that middle was. Sadly, Bob Backlund has dementia. A longtime resident of Connecticut, he is now living in Florida with his sister. My thoughts are with him and his family. You've been listening to Wrestling with Heels On. Join me in 2 weeks, maybe, and we'll take another trip down.
Hey, mate, I sat through your whole wrestling podcast just to say that line myself.
Oh, of course. Please, go ahead.
When we'll take another trip down Villainy Lane together, only on the Sports History Network.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, a.k.a. the Football History Dude, and I hope that you enjoyed this recent episode presented by the Sports History Network and were able to learn some good old-fashioned sports history knowledge nuggets. I started the Sports History Network back in 2020 with the mission to help podcasters find a community of like-minded sports history nerds, as well as helping aspiring podcasters to start their own shows. We have a little bit over 30 shows on the network right now covering all sorts of sports history. But as far as I'm concerned, we're just at the toothpick in the ocean moment, that can't even figure it out because there's so much more coming. We wanted to create the ultimate headquarters for sports yesteryear, starting with Podcast Network and our website, but we're going to continue to move into other mediums as well. And here's the cool part, because we want you to be part of our team. So if you're interested in starting your own podcast, or maybe being a guest on one of our shows, or who knows, maybe even writing an article for us over on the website. Seriously, all you gotta do is reach out to us on the contact page over at sportshistorynetwork.com. You can be as technologically savvy as a Neanderthal tapping on a stone trying to figure out this whole hieroglyphics thing back in the day. Again, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't understand the whole podcast space, we have a production team that can pretty much help you out with doing everything. All you gotta do, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, fill it out. That message goes right to me, and I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.